Welcome to the Power Hour. I'm your host, Eugene Shatsman. I'm glad you're here for another episode of optometry's biggest and longest running show, and what a show today. We're doing one of our famous panels, and you're really going to want to make sure that you hear, pun intended, what we have to talk about today. So listen, in the UK, most hearing aids are sold in optometric offices, and it kind of makes sense, right? The data says that 80% of patients between 50 and 80 are going to visit an eye doctor within the next 12 months. So we already kind of have the captive audience. We've already invested in getting them to our chair, right? So in today's All About Hearing show, we're going to learn from two industry innovators with very, very different business models, by the way. And if you're curious at all about the audiology space or what's on the horizon, you're going to be impressed. I walked in super skeptical, and by the end of the episode, I was actually pretty excited to take some action and try some cool audiology ideas with some of my clients. So I'll tell you what I learned about. First of all, we talked about the impact on the patient. It's a huge deal giving someone some of their senses back, and we already know this in our profession, but it's so transformational. We also talked about hearing technology that's available today, the crazy little things that these tiny, barely perceptible hearing aids can now do because they've become smart devices. And by the way, if you want to see what we're talking about, shameless plug for the YouTube version of this episode, because Doug is going to hold one up at some point. So we also talk about business models and whether you in your optometry practice can actually make any money doing hearing. And also you're going to hear a little bit of conspiracy theory about some people who are entering markets in the US and that you might want to watch out for. We also talk about patient flow, practice disruption, over the counter versus prescription. Again, if you're curious about subspecialties and especially about hearing, this episode is an amazing crash course. And my guests, Doug Breaker from MD Hearing and Dr. Jed Grisel from Amplify Hearing, are amazing and generous with their insights. And just before we go to the conversation, I want to remind you to subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have any feedback for me or ideas or just want to connect, go to eugeneshatsman.com or the Power Hour websites. I truly enjoy hearing from our listeners, and I'm happy to be a resource. And now, let's jump into today's Power Hour episode. All right, Jed, Doug, welcome to the Power Hour. Excited to have you both on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, so this is a panel episode, and so this is going to be really interesting because both of you guys are in the same industry, but approaching the industry from different sides. I think it might make sense for the audience if each of you just gives a brief background and kind of how you got into the industry as well. Jed, why don't you go first?
Sure, and thanks, Eugene, for having us on the show. Really look forward to this discussion. So my name is Jed Grisel. I'm an ENT physician in my day job. My practice is in Wichita Falls, Texas, which is 2 hours from Dallas. And so in my world, I see patients on a daily basis, do surgeries, I do cochlear implants. So most of my life and passion is about hearing loss. I think I got into hearing loss because I like anatomy and I like technology. My undergraduate degree is in engineering. And so I really enjoy the aspect of being able to help people with technology.
Love that. And how long have you been kind of in this partnering with optometry audiology space?
Okay. Yeah, and so in addition to seeing my patients on a daily basis, I also work with a group called Amplify Hearing. And Amplify Hearing is a UK-based company that delivers a full service hearing facility inside optometry space. And I've been doing that for about 2.5 years. And it's really fascinating to me to think about how we can bring a much needed service to more people.
Yeah, and we're going to jump right into that business model in just a second and kind of all the details there. Doug, talk a little bit about your background.
Sure, and thanks for having me. Doug Breaker, I'm CEO of MD Hearing. MD Hearing is the largest seller of OTC hearing aids in the U.S. We've been around for 15 years. We were founded by ENT here in Chicago, who was upset that hearing aids cost too much. We've sold 1.5 million hearing aids in our lifespan. And even though we're an OTC seller, we're a huge believer in the licensed professionals in the hearing space. So we've got about 35 on staff, either audiologists or hearing instrument specialists. And our goal in life is to provide real high quality hearing aids for very affordable prices, and then pair that with really professional support.
Yeah. Okay, great. So let's talk about kind of the role of audiology. And also, and you kind of alluded to this, Jed, is audiology and optometry are almost synonymous in other parts of the world, right? You can go, I think, in what 50% of the optometrists in the UK, you can get your hearing aid, you can get your hearing tested, and you can get your hearing aids there. Talk a little bit about that, and then also why those two services are so related, and why we're on an optometry podcast talking about hearing aids.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thanks, Eugene. So it's very interesting. So for decades worldwide, as you mentioned, these services are symbiotic, complementary, and it's a known entity in the public that these senses can be checked in the same location from the same trusted source. And so, like you said, over half of private pay hearing aid units are fit within the optometry space in the UK. In Japan, it's more like 2/3.
Wow.
So a tremendous level of. One interesting piece of information that I learned recently was that in the UK, last year, there were 15% more hearing tests done in optometry clinics than contact lens exams.
Wow.
So in the optometry space, they were doing more hearing care in some cases than vision care in those vision clinics, which is kind of a very interesting concept. And I think the idea here is that our senses, our vision and hearing, are what connect us to the world and what make us human. And the patient journey of having a sensory deficit, getting diagnostic testing, and then having a licensed professional treat that sensory deficit, that patient journey is very similar. The licensed professionals are very similar. There's a lot of similarities. There's some differences too, but there's a lot of similarities, and it seems like the rest of the world has this really figured out.
Mm-hmm. Doug, you want to add anything?
Yeah, it's really interesting if you look at, take the UK, for example. The big retailer there is Specsavers. Specsavers sold $500 million worth of hearing aids in 2022. So it's a huge line of business for them. And the UK, is doing a better job of getting people the help that they need with hearing loss. So if you look at the hearing aid penetration rate, the UK's, like mid 40 percentage points of people that need hearing aids actually are wearing them. And that's because of the model and their insurance setup. In the US, it's only about 1 out of 5. So 20% of people that should have hearing aids actually use hearing aids. So there's a big opportunity, and optical is a great entry point for that, because a lot of people go into optical stores to get their eyes checked, and you're dealing with a licensed professional right there.
Yeah, and it's interesting though, the stat you just brought up: 1 out of 5 people in the U.S. who need hearing aids actually have them. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that is? And kind of talk a little bit about the patient journey.
Yeah, great question. A lot of it has to do with insurance and then retail channels. So, like we mentioned, in the UK, a lot of the retail channel for hearing aids is optical, because you've got all these people coming through the optical stores, and you have a retailer in Specsavers that has already integrated, and they have for 10 and 15 years already. And their insurance, the National Health Service covers hearing aids in the UK, so that's a big part of it. In the U.S., historically, Medicare, traditional American Medicare does not cover hearing aids at all, which is a shame, but they don't. Medicare Advantage companies do cover hearing aids. Some of them do, not all. But still, the price point on average in the U.S. for a prescription hearing aid has been $4,600 for a pair. So without insurance reimbursement, that's a lot of money for somebody. So it's a combination of things, and it's unfortunate, but hopefully, through Jed's efforts and our efforts to get through into optical, we can start to change that.
Yeah. What's interesting to me is that I also think that there's this patient perception of, and Jed, you've seen these patients firsthand, so you can tell me if I'm off in thinking about this, but I kind of imagine that there's a little bit of a resistance for patients to say, I need, nobody's concerned about the fact that I need glasses, right? I need glasses to see. I get glasses. Sometimes glasses make me look smarter or look better or whatever. I think people believe that hearing aids make them look old, make them feel old. Oh, by the time I need hearing aids, that's when, I'm kind of in the last chapter of my life.
Yeah. I had a patient the other day that's lovely lady, 87 years old, had pretty significant hearing loss, needs hearing aids. And we kind of started this discussion about treating her hearing loss. And she says, well, doc, I don't want to get hearing aids because that means I'll be old. and she's 87, and so I think that I heard a veteran hearing aid dispenser once say that, nobody wants to buy a coffin and nobody wants to buy hearing aids, right? That's the
That's great.
that's the
That's
that's
the
the perception,
association you're dealing with.
right? Like, who wants to go spend money on something that they really don't need? And I think it's a shame because, as you said, we don't think twice about correcting our vision and investing in our vision care. And that's what we need to, and that perception is really changing. I think that the technology, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in a little bit, but the technology is getting better. What can be done is tremendously different than what we could do a decade ago. The knowledge about the effects of untreated hearing loss are really growing. And so I see more and more patients coming in asking me about treating hearing loss because they see some of this literature that's out there.
Yeah, and I think there's a big difference between a coffin and hearing aids. The reality is that coffin isn't going to add anything to your quality of life, but I think getting your hearing to making your hearing better, I think has tremendous value towards your quality of life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And think about it this way. We are at this very interesting point in the history of mankind. So in the year 1900, and I talk to my patients about this, in the year 1900, your average life expectancy was about 40, right? And the top three causes of death were things like, infection, trauma, things like that. Fast forward 124 years, now half of us on this call, half of our generation will live to be 100 years old. Well, hearing loss
Wow.
the incidence of hearing loss doesn't really start until our 50s or 60s. That's
Hmm.
when we start to see at a population level it grow. So for the first time in human history, we have millions, a large chunk of human society living for 40, 50 years with sensory deprivation, with hearing loss. And now we're starting to see humans have never had to deal with that problem before, right? Because we would die before it became an issue. But now we're living longer. And so thinking of the effects of cognitive health and on mental health and social quality of life. And so these are things that we have to wrap our minds around as a public of how to keep not just live longer, but live longer happily.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you said sensory deprivation. Back to what Doug was saying earlier, is it's true that this is how this is related to optometry because if you're really out there and preeminently trying to make patients' lives better, the truth is that you might have an access channel to truly help them with more than just their vision or their sense of sight, their sense of hearing as well. So let's maybe jump into some business models because I think it's important for people to understand, what these business models even look like and how, people are integrating hearing and vision together in one practice, typically driven by optometrists. And we can talk about the business models. We can maybe talk about the market's resistance to those business models. And my goal for the listeners is to be able to really understand it at a level where if they've never heard of it before, they can start thinking about, is this something that in the future I might even consider adding to my practice, or totally not for me, like totally makes no sense. So I wanted to kind of drill down and get some clarity on this. So I don't know who wants to start, but let's talk about the business models available to optometrists that might be helpful to give perspective for the marketplace.
Doug, do you want
Sure, I can
to
start.
do that? Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'll start. So the big difference between what Jed is going to talk about and what I'm going to talk about is we sell over-the-counter devices, so OTC hearing aids. So just keep that in your mind because OTC hearing aids don't require a hearing test. They don't require a prescription. Eugene, you mentioned Walgreens before. Uh, OTC hearing aids are really, over-the-counter type devices. So you don't need the intervention of a licensed professional. We happen to have a bunch of licensed professionals because we believe in that, but you can go on Amazon or Target.com or anything and just buy these right now. And the reason these came about a couple of years ago is the FDA said, "Hey, hearing aids are too expensive, and we want more people to have hearing aids in their ears, so we want to make them more affordable and easier to get." So I'll just preface it with that. The way that our business model works, and we're live with a handful of stores kind of in the Chicago area, is we give the stores a whole bunch of marketing stuff, but the basis of it is a very easy iPad-based hearing test. It's our hearing test that we created. It can fit in multiple places within the flow of an optical store. So,
Mm-hmm.
right after a vision screening test, or even in the waiting room before, or the different stores are doing it a little bit differently. Like after the doctor comes out and says, "Okay, I recommend this and this and this for the patient," and I think they should take a hearing test as well. Um, the patient will take the hearing test in the optical retail store, at whatever point is good for them. It takes about 5 to 7 minutes. It's really easy.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then they schedule a telemed consultation with one of our licensed hearing professionals to be done after their visit. So that could be later that day, the next day, the next week, whatever. That consultation's done usually via video. All they need is any tablet or smartphone, and they can do it. And that's done with one of our licensed hearing professionals. These people have usually had 10 years of clinic experience, and so they really know how to care for people with hearing loss. They'll walk them through a typical like in-clinic experience, just we're doing it via telemed of, hey, here's your hearing loss. It's mild to moderate, or it's, more profound to severe. And then they'll make a recommendation based on that. Um, we just had one the other day with asymmetric hearing loss. And so the recommendation there is like, hey, you actually have to go see an ENT because there might be a medical issue there. If through that process we do end up selling a hearing aid, then we'll do a revenue share back to the optical store. So it's a really, really, that's it. It's a really simple model. The optical retailer, does the hearing test right in store with the person, 5 to 7 minutes, put wherever in their flow that they want. Then we follow up after with the telemed consultation, and then it's a revenue share.
And let's just, I don't necessarily
Yeah,
need to go through the detail of the numbers, but let's just
sure.
imagine I referred you, I don't know, a patient a day. How much money in my optical can I make?
Yeah, patient a day, if they have hearing loss, you're going to add roughly, call it 15 to 20% to your bottom line. So because the revenue share just goes, it's all profit. There's no cost of goods on that. So on
Well,
pure
so
revenue,
I don't know
we
what
do
that
less.
means. So dollars wise, how much is if I'm sending you, if one patient a day, let maybe even say I refer you two patients a day, but one patient ends up buying hearing aids. What does that generate in
Yeah,
revenue for my practice?
call it 5 purchases a week. You're looking at probably $500 to $1,000 in pure profit per week to your store.
Okay, great. Okay, so that I think I understand that model. We can talk about the objections to that model in a second. Jed, go over your model. How does your
Sure.
business model work?
Yeah, and I think it's just to, before we go into that business model, just to reiterate, there's two different really ways to get hearing care treated in the United States in 2024. Right?
Mm-hmm.
There's the OTC method, which became a reality in 2022 when the FDA rule went into effect, and that's where you can go into Walgreens and buy a hearing. It's a consumer product, and to MD Hearing's credit, they're backing that with some support, right? The other way is the way that you traditionally think of when you go to the ENT doctor or to Miracle Ear or to any other retail chain or anything like that, is you the patient journey in that situation is what we call prescription hearing aid, and that's where you go in person, get a diagnostic battery of tests to really fully assess the hearing, like you would do if you came to my ENT clinic, and then you are given some treatment options with a licensed professional who in person fits you and programs you with a pair of hearing aids that are specifically customized, sort of like the computer program that programs this hearing aid is like your prescription for your glasses, but for these hearing aids. And that process is what we call prescription. So what Amplify does is we install a prescription hearing service within an optometry clinic. That's
Mm-hmm.
what we do.
Got it.
And I don't know what the current ASP of a OTC product is, like average.
So we sell ours from anywhere from $300 a pair up to like $800 a pair.
Yeah, so 300 to 800. There are some OTC products that are 1,200, Six, some
Yeah,
that are more.
if you look at the Jabra devices, they'll be like $1,500, or Sony or like Bose will be Lexi now will be like $800, $900. So we're a little bit lower, but some
And,
OTC will be more around the $1,000 mark.
and so if you look like in my ENT practice, our price for different tiers of prescription technology are ranging anywhere from, 2,000 for an entry level product, like $1,000 an ear, all the way up to 6,300 for the highest end tier product. In some clinics, you'll see that even higher, $8,000-9,000. It's a lot of money, and really if you think about it from the hearing professional's perspective, the concept there is like what you're actually getting is product technology and a professional's care, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of that's what that cost is. So it's like if you're going to have that hearing aid for, let's say, 3 to 5 years. So if you take that 5 years and you divide that of having access to a hearing professional with the technology to treat the hearing loss for those 5 years, that's really what that cost entails.
Mm-hmm.
And so and I think it's also important to recognize, like, the FDA criteria for OTC products is different in the types of hearing loss they treat than prescription. So, for example, we in the hearing world categorize hearing loss as like mild, moderate, severe, profound, and the OTC products are FDA approved for mild to moderate loss that's not asymmetric, doesn't have ear pain. There's all these like reasons why or indications for when an OTC product is helpful. For prescription products, if you have a severe or profound hearing loss, you're really not a candidate for OTC anyway, right? And so that's why the experience that patients are getting with MD Hearing and with Amplify are actually complementary experiences. And in one situation, we're doing an OTC experience, and another, a prescription experience.
Yeah. One way to think about the OTC aids is it's a really good way to get started. OTC aids are meant for mild to moderate age-related hearing loss, which is most of the hearing loss in the US, but it doesn't do things like very bad hearing loss, so severe or profound, any medical issues like asymmetric loss, or if there's something else going on, you need to go see somebody or get prescription aids. Any kids, that's a medical issue that you need to go see somebody. So there's room for both, for sure. And we have the same mission of like helping people hear better. It's just different methods of doing it.
Yeah.
OTC makes it very easy, but it's not for everybody. And prescription is going to get like the one-on-one, in-person care.
And the two of you, I think, are certainly you've done a lot to make sure that the model is best in class and serves patients well. I also know there's other models in optometry where you could potentially refer patients to an offsite. Could kind of just get patients an online hearing test by referring them over, and then they get referred offsite somewhere, and there's hearing professionals who try to come to the patient, or sometimes it doesn't work. And I know that there's a lot of models that have been tried. What I know is that both of you have had some successes with optometrists, but also some optometrists that are resistant. And so I want to go there next, and I want to hear a little bit more about the reason why it doesn't work. What's the reason why an optometrist might say, yeah, this seems like a good idea? And by the way, Jed, we never got to your numbers, so I'm going to have you start. Talk
Sure.
a little bit about that. Again, if I sent you one patient or two patients per week, or you got one sale, one patient or two patients per day, and you got one sale a day in that audiology clinic that you set up inside the optometrist's office, what's the doctor going to make? And talk to me about why. Number one, how much are they going to make? Number two, why would they say no to that?
Yeah. So, those are great questions. And so, as we talked about, we're trying to as closely replicate on the hearing side the experience for the patient that they're getting at your high touch optometry experience. So we're trying to match those service lines. So if you and the way that our model works, without going into too much detail and giving away too many secrets, no, I'm kidding. But the way that we work is the number of days per week that we can justify putting a hearing professional in that clinic translates directly into how much money optometrists would make. So it's a little bit different of a model. But if you had enough volume to keep an audiologist busy or a dispenser busy 5 days a week, so 10 half days a week, and they were busy, it would not be unreasonable to expect that person to generate somewhere between 400,000 and 500,000 a year top line revenue, and about 15% of that would go directly to the bottom line of that OD. So if you think about $70,000 a year of extra revenue, but then if you, as Doug was saying, how much optometry volume would you have to do to translate to that level of bottom line profit? At 15, if an optometry practice is operating at a 15% EBITDA, you'd have to generate $500,000 of optometry revenue to translate to that. So we've really tried to model this in a way that it's at equivalent or better than having another lane, right? So that gets us into the next question, which is why would somebody not want to do this?
Right.
With our model, you have to have the space.
Okay.
Right. So whereas in Doug's model, you don't need to have the space. So if you have a lane that's busy 4 days a week and you're wondering what to do with that space for another day a week and turn that non-revenue generating space into revenue generating space, this is a great option. The other reason why people have tried this and failed is if you're an optometrist and you want to bring this on yourself, you got to hire the hearing professional. You got to get contracts with the manufacturers to get the hearing aids. You got to deal with all the marketing yourself, train, all these sorts of things. And that's a lot of work. And you're adding the salary of another licensed professional to your P&L.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in our model, one of the beautiful things about our model is that it sort of de-risks it for people. So that it becomes a passive revenue stream that you do not have to manage. So as opposed to think about like aesthetics. If you want to do aesthetics, there's dollars to be made in aesthetics, but you got to invest in it. There's capital outlay. You got to manage it. You're going to be a while before it becomes revenue or cash flow positive. Whereas in this, it's sort of like a plug and play passive revenue stream.
Yeah, but I still think you get resistance, even if I have the space. You would still get some resistance from some optometrists. I can't imagine that every time you tell someone, okay, I want to add this to your practice, and they say, well, I got the space, but what's the but?
Yeah, I think is it worth my time and effort, like we talked about? Like, is it going to be a headache for me to manage? Do I have the space? Is the juice worth the squeeze? So there's enough revenue to make it worth my time and effort? And then I think there's always going to be some optometrists that say, is this my core competency?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right? What we run into as well. So like our model, you don't need space. There's really no investment because we'll give the iPad and the test and everything else. So literally there's not investment. You just have to give people the test. But to Jed's point, like, business is hard and you always want to focus on your core thing. And so if you're running an optical clinic, that's your go-to and that's your default is like, I just want to be better at that or like do more volume there. And you need conviction to do something new and to add something new. And it's, moving into hearing is a little scary sometimes because it's, they're not trained in that.
Well, and more so, I could imagine a world where, and I think Doug, you're hitting on that exact point, is that I'm getting my patient out of the room, and I'm putting them in the optical, and I'm doing the best handoff I possibly can. And my goal is to sell them a pair of glasses, but really my goal is to sell them a pair of glasses with coatings on them, and really my goal is to get them a pair of glasses with coatings with a second pair on them, and really my goal is to add a warranty to that and to make sure that we're profitable on it. And then possibly my goal is to get them to refer another patient before they walk out. And so with all that in mind, is there really room for another thing? And I think that's probably the viable objection that most people say, is they say, to your point about the core competency, is that, I'm already asking a lot of my patients, and I got to get them to pay their bill at the end of the transaction or of the patient visit as well. And I got to make them another appointment for a year from now, potentially. And now I got to add a hearing test. So I think that's one of the core points of resistance. But you're saying, but look, guys, it could be worth it. because how much money are you really going to make in a week selling a I don't know, and maybe some cases, some practices are going to make a lot, but how many practices are really going to have a high enough number of second pair sales, or a high enough number of super high end premium coating sales to justify giving up that $1,000 a week that you guys are talking about or more?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up those points, because we have had objections of like, hey, we don't want you to interrupt our order flow. Like we don't want you to like jeopardize the glasses sale at the end of the visit. And so what we've done, and we're trying to do with the pilot stores that we have, is reframe offering the hearing test as a value add, because in our model anyway, like the hearing test happens during the visit, and the patient should feel a little special. They get a free hearing test, and it's an additional screening test they get. And then we don't do the consult until after. So, that purchase has already happened at the optical retail store. It's already done. And then they get this, free consultation with a licensed hearing professional after, which is a valuable thing. And our price points match up with a lot of optical price points as well. So it's not, you're not asking for a whole lot of money. You're asking for a reasonable amount of money. So, but yeah, we hear those objections a lot.
Well, and I think to that point, and Jed, I want you to tell me if this is true or not. Some people believe that their patient is shopping with one checking account, right? And so, I'm either going to spend $1,000 on, two pairs of glasses or something, or I might spend $1,000 as a down payment on a hearing aid or something. So, is that true? Is there a way to work through that perception?
Well, I have two comments about this. The first comment is 80%, this is data from the Mayo Clinic, 80% of adults aged 50 to 80 will visit their optometrist in the next 12 months. 80% of adults with hearing loss, right? So optometry has already captured the market. Like optometry, you've already done the work, right? Like you've already done the work. Optometry, probably better than any specialty in the country, in the world, has built this framework where all the people with hearing loss are going already. And we know that those people are buying hearing aids. They're going to their ENT doc, or they're going to Costco, or they're going to wherever. So, but you've already invested. It's a way to expand the wallet, to capture things that you've already done the work to build. And those patients are going to buy that somewhere, right? So I don't have data to say like, oh, if you bought a hearing aid, you're going to buy less glasses. But I do think that in general, these are different, like they're different parts of people's brains, right? They're making these purchases already separately.
That's a really great point, Jed. And I love the way that you said that. Is we've already captured the market. Why not optimize it and just get paid more for what we've already invested in? Because most optometrists have invested in their community, in their in the reputation, in their marketing, whatever they've done to build their practice. Those patients are there. So if
I was like in my world in ENT, we always get frustrated because we see us like our conversion rate is like 90% in ENT, but that's because for a patient to get all the way through the channel to us, we're seeing this very small sliver. But if I was like, Fauci or somebody, and I was going to try to build a national health system to capture every hearing loss patient, I would go to optometry first, right? Because that's where they're already going, right? The second point I'd like to make is we're talking about like, parsing out is this number of dollar amount worth it or not, or whatever. In the UK, the thing that switched it, just in all transparency, was when Specsavers did it. If you're an independent, suddenly your patients now can get vision and hearing with your competitor, but they can only get vision with you. Right. And so that was the thing that tipped it over. And this is not, it's just an interesting fact is, in the last 12 months or so, I don't know the exact date, but Specsavers has made an acquisition in the US. It's not retail chains yet. It's a lab, but there's very clear indications that process is happening. And there's a group called Filmen, a German company that does vision and hearing that just purchased Shopko. So we're starting to see these international players who do vision and hearing and get the vision, and they are here in the U.S. So
So
that
you think
process.
they're gonna, or they, or somebody, whoever's first to market to say it's a competitive advantage. And to Doug's point, you can get a free hearing test during your eye exam. That's
Yeah,
not a problem. That's a benefit. We're trying to
correct.
give you more patient. We're trying to enhance your patient journey, and especially if it's going to improve your quality of life. Now, I want to shift the conversation a little bit because I do think that the patient perception in the United States is not great. And you made the point earlier that the 1 out of 5 patients that need hearing that have hearing loss are actually getting the products that they need to manage that hearing loss or to help with that sensory deprivation. So let's talk about technology. And how is technology? Because I think some people, when they think hearing aids, they think about those like beige things that are like the size of your ear that are sticking out and then just sending, like satellites sending a signal to the world that you're old. I'm pretty sure the technology has evolved pretty far beyond that.
Yeah. So like I mentioned before, we've sold 1.5 million hearing aids in our lifetime, and we constantly, it's called split testing, but like market test different things and what consumers react to. And they react to a few things. Vanity, so size of the hearing aid. So nobody wants to advertise that they're wearing a big, huge hearing aid. Affordability is a big one. Uh, People like the little in the ears better than behind the ear, but the behind the ears end up working a little bit better. Uh, and support and like the interaction with somebody really knowledgeable is huge. Um, but the technology has come a long way, and I'm going to hold one up here, but the listeners won't be able to see this. So this is our latest one. It's a really tiny one. I just got this last week.
Oh yeah.
Um, and this fits in your ear. You can barely see it. And it's great because, I think Jed, you said they compared him to a coffin before. Nobody's excited to get like a hearing aid like they are like glasses or cool headphones or AirPods or anything. They're a grudge purchase, like it or not. But the technology's moved far enough where now the size and the rechargeability, the battery life, and you know, they're becoming very, very usable, which is a great thing to see. And then on the high end, Jed will sell way more of these than we do, but like with streaming and with like some of the AI stuff and fall detection, the tech is really, really cool. We sell more Toyotas than Lexuses, but the tech is really, really getting there.
Yeah, I think that you hit it on the head. Like the technology is so different than what we think about with like our parents or grandparents. Hearing aids, the prescription hearing aids have what he was talking about, fall detection. So there's a little accelerometer in there, so it can count your steps. Can know if you fell and you're not moving, it'll send a message to an app on your phone that will say, would you like us to call a family member? And if you don't intervene, it will call a predetermined list of relatives. So if you fall in, it can detect that. There's features on devices so that if you go, let's say you go to a restaurant and you set certain settings because that restaurant is noisy to help you hear in that environment. Then you leave and it reverts back to your default settings. Well, there's a GPS tracker basically there so that the next time you enter that setting, it will automatically recognize that you're there and it will revert back to those specific settings. So there's all kinds of really cool for
That
people
is
who
really
like,
cool. That's super
yeah. So
technologically advanced.
for people who like tech, there's lots of really cool things. But I also think, well, when I see it, like who better to make hearing cool than vision?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like vision
They've
has
already done
made
it.
vision. Yeah, like optometry has made vision cool for a long time. Like my daughter went and bought glasses. She doesn't even have vision loss. She just wanted glasses. And I'm like, why are we spending money on glasses? And she's just like, they look cool, right? And so it's opposed to being ashamed of the technology. I think you should be proud of it. And we should partner with people who know how to make hearing, like, sensory technology cool. And, you see now Apple but I think that's only helped us to the people see that, oh, it's not bad to have something in your ears.
Yeah, and so what I'm hearing you say is that there is that all of these hearing aids essentially, And I don't know if you can take phone calls on them. Is it like a Bluetooth headset?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Stream your phone, your TV, all these different things.
So it's basically like a AirPods type of thing that has way more features and gadgets than these AirPods, and you could technically have the technology could potentially be mostly invisible based off of what Doug just held up.
Correct.
Yeah, a lot. I know when people are wearing hearing aids for the most part because I sell hearing aids, but if you're not looking for them now, you can't really see them because even like the behind the ear ones, you'll just see a little tiny clear tube. The in the ear ones are small enough now where you don't really see them. Like they're really pretty invisible now, which is great.
Okay. And let's talk about quality of life enhancement. When somebody, and maybe, I understand if that 80-something-year-old person you just met, goes from, I don't know, no, very limited hearing, what maybe you'd call severe on your scale, to a lot better hearing. I'm sure there's massive quality of life improvements. So we can talk about those, but I also want to hear about some quality of life improvements for patients that optometrists can help facilitate if you're in the early stages of hearing loss. What is that like, and how can you change patients' lives?
Well, I think if we're going to have the quality of life and benefits of treating, you can't have this discussion without referencing a big study that was published in the last year called the Achieve trial. There's a gentleman named Frank Lynn. He's a colleague of mine, an ENT doc at Johns Hopkins, and they did a multi-year, multi-site. I think it was a $16 million plus randomized control trial, and they took several groups of patients, and they took them, and so part of the patients they treated with hearing aids. All of these patients had hearing loss, and then another part of the patients they did other healthy lifestyle things. And for a group of those patients, the patients who were older, who had high risk of developing dementia, over the 3 years of the study, 48% fewer patients who treated their hearing loss developed dementia than the patients who did not use hearing aids. It wasn't the whole group of study, it was as a subset of the patients, but there is now undisputable scientific evidence that treating hearing loss does improve cognitive health as we age. And the important thing about that, for those patients who are at risk, the earlier you intervene, the better. So the best time to start treating your hearing loss is probably, in your 50s when you start to develop it, because then you don't go without that sensory deprivation for the next 30 years. If a patient comes into me when they're 80, I'll treat their hearing loss and it'll help them be happier and not feel so isolated and that sort of thing. But I've lost all of that time that I get to treat them.
Yeah, right.
So it's really important.
They've
Earlier
had to
is better.
suffer for 30 years or 20 years at that point, between when they first developed it to. And I think about simple things, quality of life, that, I'm just thinking, if I'm an optometrist and I recommended that someone get a hearing test, what's my patient going to say a year later and say, I got hearing aids, and by the way, you can't see them. And by the way, I can now participate in family dinner conversations more. What else?
Right. Doug?
Yeah, no, just participating in life. I'm sure Jed has seen this too, but the transformation you'll see in somebody that has hearing loss untreated and then they get hearing aids, it's so dramatic. Like you'll be around a dinner table and the person that wasn't saying anything all of a sudden is a lively person and they seem smarter or sharper or more with it. It's because they can hear. One of the things that we did to help people understand this is we have a free online hearing test, but it will simulate somebody's hearing loss. So if you have a loved one that has hearing loss, go have them take the test and then listen to the simulation of what they're actually hearing. And it is profoundly moving. We were one of the optical patients that came through yesterday. We did a consult today, and unfortunately, she didn't get hearing aids yet, but she needs them. And I listened to her simulation, and it's just so dramatic. Like we do kids' voices in restaurants and different situations, and the impact on just living life without being able to connect, and talk to people is so dramatic. And Jed mentioned the Johns Hopkins studies. There's been more too that really tie untreated hearing loss with depression and social isolation. And more hospital visits and higher healthcare costs. And it is just a shame that we haven't done a better job as a country to get hearing aids in ears and help these people out, because when you put yourself in their shoes, it's so dramatic, and you just feel so bad for these people because they're not connecting, they're not living life.
And I think when a patient has that transformative experience, and the place that they got that transformative experience was your optometry clinic,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
you can't really put a dollar figure on that, but that loyalty and stickiness is real, right? Like the patients that I do cochlear implants on and I help them hear, those patients, they love you. They right because of what you've given them back.
Yeah.
They also come back in a given year on a prescription hearing aid. The patient will come back 3 or 4 times to see the hearing professional to do tweaks and reprogramming and change a dome or something on the hearing aid. And those are transactions where the patient is now in your store, and maybe they notice now that you have a summer sunglasses sale or something like that. So it's actually an easy way to get patients to. Now your clinic is now a sensory clinic. It's not you're doing these multiple things, and the patient sees that's the go-to place for all things sensory care. So it's just more opportunities to kind of cross-pollinate, I think.
Yeah, this is a really interesting point in the whole kind of taking care of all the senses. One of the questions I have is around how receptive patients are when, and you, Doug, you kind of alluded to this a second ago, is you guys just saw a patient and you presented them the options, and they're relatively inexpensive options compared to what else is out there in the marketplace, and they didn't take you up on this. Out of 10 patients that you present with this, what percentage of patients actually say, yep, let's go ahead with this? And then, Doug, you say talk about yours,
Yeah.
and then Jed, you talk about yours, because I think you have a different model.
Yeah, obviously we're remote, so we're either telemed over video or on the phone. If somebody has hearing loss, about half of them will end up buying from us, either from us, or we'll refer them out to, um, a clinic if it's severe, profound, or an ENT, that if there's a medical issue there. So about half.
Got it. Jed?
Well, and in our situation, it's a little different. It sort of depends on you're what you're talking about. But remember, these patients, they're showing up in person
In
to
person.
Mm-hmm.
in person to an exam. So in my ENT clinic, it's probably, like I said, 80-90%. But
Mm-hmm.
they're at the end of that kind of, they've had to figure out how to get there. In our optometry clinic, it's probably more like 30%.
Mm-hmm. But
Remember
it's a
the
high
AS
ticket. It's a high ticket sale.
average, yeah, 4,200. Yeah. So what we know about the and in full transparency is, in an optometry location, we're at a different place in the hearing care and healthcare environment. So there's going to be more patients with normal hearing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like in Doug's and in Amplify's experience, there's going to be more patients with normal hearing than you would see in an ENT clinic, and that's okay. It's a more frontline experience. But once the patients, have the hearing loss and they need it, the conversion rates are not too dissimilar.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as an optical clinic owner, I would look at the ages of my patients very closely. So, like, prescription lens use starts really early in life, um, and as Jed pointed out before, hearing loss doesn't really start to happen really until like you're 50, and then 50 to 60, it's 13%. Once you get to 60 to 70, it's 26%. Once you get over 70, it's over half, and then once you get over 80, it's over 80% have hearing loss. So it really jumps up as you age. So as an optical store owner, I would really closely look at the patient base to say, how many old people do I have, because that's really going to drive
Well, and
hearing aid
and I think
purchases.
that's a profound point, Doug, because in all reality is that you don't want to tell every patient they need a hearing test. Now,
No.
I'd be curious, would you guys say every patient over 50 should get a free hearing test?
Yeah,
That's a
if people want a free hearing test, there's no reason not to. Like, we've had patients come through these stores that work in the trades or work in a factory, and they're really worried about like the noise exposure. So if they want one, like, absolutely give them one. But really, everybody over 50 should in my
Well, we
opinion
just
anyway.
talked about people aren't going to self-identify as
Yeah.
Right.
I'm going deaf, right? Like
Yeah.
nobody's going to self-identify. So I think
Right.
it's based off of the recommendation of the professional, which you
Mhm.
have to train the optometrist. We're going to talk about this in a second. You got to train the optometrist. You got to train the staff. But should the policy be? Is this what you're recommending? Should the policy be
Yeah.
everybody over a certain age gets a hearing test? Jed, what do you think?
Yeah. What we tell people is anyone over 50 or who has a hearing complaint.
Mhm.
So as part of our model, we have a very basic questionnaire that the patient fills out during their flow through the optometry experience, and it asks a few basic questions about their hearing, and if the patient is identified, if they're over 50 or they identify through the questionnaire they're having issues, then the recommendation is to schedule them for a hearing test.
Got it. Now, this is where it gets a little dicey because we may agree that we can add a tremendous amount of quality of life to patients. We may agree that this is a revenue opportunity for a practice. May even agree that this is a big differentiator because somebody eventually is going to figure out this model, and you don't want to be last to the dance. You probably want to be in the early adopter model, especially since there's so many benefits. Now, the question is, you got to change behavior inside your practice. How hard is that behavior to change? And we kind of talked about this a little bit before when we're thinking about all the things we're asking our staff to do inside of optometry practices. And what's the minimum viable behavior change that you've seen work, either of you, in optometry practices, especially the ones that are top performers in your categories?
Yeah, for us, it's really connecting with the doctors. So really helping them understand how important it is to screen for hearing loss and then to treat it. And like the dementia aspect, if you don't treat it, like there's a lot of evidence out there that if you don't treat it, bad things happen. And the best thing you can do for your patient is to, especially if you notice hearing loss or the person like needs hearing aids, like help them treat that. And so really getting them to understand and ask questions and get comfortable with how easy it can be to test, and then the importance of treating it. That's been one key for us. And so when the doctor's on board, then then good things happen.
And as a doctor, I can say this, which is hard as hell to do, right? Like we get in our ruts and we do our things, but I think that for the optometrist listening, I think it's just the sort of parting thoughts I would say is your patients love you, right? They trust you, they come, and that is such a powerful relationship. We as Amplify or MD Hearing, we can work on like protocols to make it as easy as possible. We can have checklists, and you can have the front desk, and we have virtual assistants that can take that work off the clinic to reschedule things. But that one comment, if the patient is in the right age group and has the risk, just having the OD at the end of the conversation, just say, you know what, let's get you a hearing test. That's all. If the optometrist will do that, the patients will listen, and it's such a powerful thing. It doesn't take a lot of time, but it does take some understanding of the importance of treating hearing loss and also the special nature of that relationship between the optometrist and their patient.
Yeah,
So, do you guys both believe that at some point in the future, let's just say some point before 2030, 2035, that we will catch up to the European model and hearing aids will be as common inside of optometry practices as they are in other parts of the world?
absolutely. Jed mentioned before Fielman. Fielman's up to 220 stores in the U.S. In Europe, they average 300,000 in revenue per store per year when in hearing aid sales. Specsavers already has 100 stores in Canada. They're going to come into the U.S. Luxottica is launching their hearing aid glasses in the U.S. in a big way. So it's coming. It's going to take a while. Like nothing happens overnight, but in our view, anyway, it's certainly on its way.
Jed, your thoughts?
Yeah. Hopefully, my CEO of Amplify, who's in the UK, will listen to this.
Yeah.
And give him a chuckle. That it's gonna our American solution will be uniquely American. because that's how we are. It's not going to be a copy of anywhere else. But I think when we figure it out, we're going to crush everybody, like we always do, right? like I think that's how it will work. The potential, if you, without going into too much math, but there is a multi-billion-dollar hearing and optical channel in the U.S. waiting for whoever's ready to tackle it.
Well,
right?
and what I'm hearing is, look, there's an underserved population. People are suffering with a condition that could drastically improve their quality of life, and it's an underserved population. The technology is good enough that it can overcome most objections patients have, except money, and money could probably, there's lots of different ways to overcome that. It sounds to me like this could be a competitive advantage for a practice, and that if you don't do it now, or if you don't do it soon, then potentially there's somebody else coming who will beat you to the race. And it also sounds to me like there's a revenue opportunity in serving these patients that can add as much profit to your practice as adding another type of service or a subspecialty or anything like that. So, I think there's lots and lots of opportunity, and I'm glad that we got a chance to talk about it today, because I think that this is the first of many conversations that I think optometry, or maybe this is an early conversation of many conversations that the optometry industry needs to hear about, these adjacencies that can be integrated. And again, like you said, Jed, earlier in the conversation, I mean, it really resonated when you said, we've already spent the money, the resources, all of the goodwill to get these patients into our practice. We're already serving them. Let's just serve them at a deeper level and make their lives better. And I'm bought in. So thanks for getting me across the line. And I hope that this has been a useful conversation to our listeners as we evaluate the types of things that are on the horizon. Jed, Doug, thank you both for being on the show. Any parting thoughts from either of you?
Just help us help you. Like I said, only 1 in 5 people in the U.S. that needs a hearing aid is wearing one now. So let's together change that. Like, with the opportunities there, and we'd love to be part of the solution.
Yeah. And my parting thoughts, first of all, Eugene, thanks for putting this together. And Doug, it's great to see you again.
You too.
My only parting thoughts would be, if you're an optometrist and you have considered anything in broadening your scope, aesthetics, dry eye, myopia, any of those sorts of things to broaden your scope to your patients, this is a way that requires much less involvement with only upside, right? I mean, there's a tremendous amount of upside, and it's at least, I think, a good thing to consider. I'm not saying it will be the right fit for every optometrist. It won't, I think it's a good thing for optometrists to consider bringing into their practice.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, thank you both for being on the Power Hour today. Great conversation. Excited to have you both on the show. Hey there, it's Eugene, and I've got a question for you. Do you do medical billing in your practice? What if we took 10 charts and looked at them pretty closely? Would they be good enough to pass an audit? Or would you owe the insurance company some money? Or would there be some found revenue that you could put back in your pocket? So looking at 10 charts is a new service that's now available from the Power Practice, and it's called the Power Audit. What happens during the Power Audit is that some of the most knowledgeable billing experts in the country are going to do a friendly audit on your charts and see if they can find opportunities. By the way, in auditing hundreds of charts, 9 out of 10 charts they look at, they find something. And typically that something fits into 2 categories. 1, something that better protects your practice, or 2, something that can make you more money. In fact, almost every single audit they do uncovers underbilling areas where you can get paid more for what you already did. So let's just play it out. You send them your medical charts, and a few weeks later, they provide you with a detailed report, an analysis, a write-up, a coaching guide that helps you prevent any issues in the future. And again, helps you get paid more for what you're already doing while protecting your practice. So if you're doing any amount of medical billing in your practice, this is a service that's well worth the $2,500 it costs. And as a limited time opportunity, 10 listeners from this episode can get a $700 savings certificate for the Power Audit. So the price is only $17.99, but the opportunities that the Power Audit uncovers are worth many, many, many multiples of that. So go to the Power Practice website. Up near the top, you can click Request a Power Audit. Now, you're not committing to pay anyone at that point. You're just locking in your $700 savings. But you will get a chance to schedule a 10-minute phone call to get your questions answered and to see if the Power Audit is a fit for your practice. Again, that's the Power Audit on thepowerpractice.com.